throughout this show. Thomas, right now, gotta jump into our top story with our very own Rachel Premack. Rachel, thanks for joining us this morning. What are you talking about?
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Rachel, thanks so much for being here. And we have updates around the US Postal Service. What's going on over there?
Yeah, so for the past 10 or so years, we've really seen the USPS start to spend more on freight brokers rather than rely on their in-house network of contract carriers and employed truck drivers. And that's really accelerated in the past 2 years under the new Postmaster General Louis DeJoy's tenure.
And so,
sorry about that. Talking about the changes here, the folks used to run exclusively mail, but now we're broadening out. Is this part of like a cost-cutting measure, or just kind of the march of time?
Yeah, so a big part of that is definitely their shift to carrying more parcel, carrying more boxes rather than just your typical envelopes and letter mail, and more flat objects. The other sorts of trend that's happening right now is also that they are shifting, moving mail through air onto their ground network. So that's why you're seeing the Postal Service also try to spend less money on FedEx and UPS and their other sort of air partners as they move more onto ground. That will slow the delivery of mail, but that's all just part of this cost-cutting measure.
And Rachel, of course, when we look at the last 18 to 24 months, there's been a lot of changes throughout the economy in different industries. What's been one of the driving forces behind the change that we're seeing in the USPS right now?
Yeah, so they've really just been trying to cut costs wherever they can for decades, honestly, just because of all the financial issues going on there. But the new Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy, coming from industry, he previously had his own logistics company called New Breed Logistics that was a USPS contractor that, of course, sold to XPO. He served on the board of directors at XPO for several years before taking this role. That he really has a mind towards how to run the Postal Service, quote, like a business, you could say. Some people think that a government agency should be run like a government agency. Some people, think it should be run under this more efficient capitalist, kind of way. But the point is that the Postal Service is adapting to sort of industry standards that maybe they should have a few decades ago, or maybe it's good that they moved a little slow to it. So up to whatever perspective you might have on the Postal Service.
And looking at, there was a recent stat of carriers that had went bankrupted in the past 2 years that had ran exclusively Postal Service freight. Is that something where we may see some continuing bankruptcies as these changes move into effect?
Yeah, so a few different exclusive postal carriers have actually pointed to changes at the Postal Service for why they've been having financial struggles. And it's hard to say whether, okay, now that they're doing so much brokerage work, that's going to, bankrupt all these other companies. It's hard to really say that for now, but there are a few different cases where we've seen, one trucking contractor said that the Postal Service's new software that they rolled out cost them $110 million, sparked hundreds of layoffs. So there's a few different issues that come about as they adopt this new technology. Not every rollout will be seamless. And we are definitely seeing that some postal contractors are struggling to adapt to this new technology, and the Postal Service's rollout of these technologies might not be particularly seamless either.
And Rachel, as we see these changes happen, what will need to happen with infrastructure as we continue to move forward with this?
What do you mean by infrastructure?
So does USPS have the infrastructure to really kind of really run at their full scale that they're looking to get at, or do they have to build out their infrastructure a little bit more to really kind of complete their plan, or is it more kind of internal changes and process changes?
That makes sense. Sorry, it's early in the morning, so I'm like, infrastructure? We're talking about highways? Anyways, they definitely do need to continue building up their IT spend, trying to make sure that the technology that they are pushing onto carriers, that technology actually works and is functioning. I would say that's probably the top concern for the Postal Service and its carriers, is just making sure that technological side is actually functioning.
And kind of moving forward. So we're talking about, especially the USPS is changing. It's getting pressure from other groups. What are you expecting? Is there anything the big you've been looking at in the next 6 months that we need to keep an eye on regarding the Postal Service?
Yeah, so this brokerage spend will, according to my sources who's following the data, much more closer than I am, as someone whose job is not Postal Service exclusive. They said that this brokerage spend has been increasing in the past few months, that it will most likely continue to increase, and that that's really one big thing. And just trying to see how these new contracts that they've implemented that say, okay, we're going to assess our need for your services every week or every month, rather than saying, okay, this is our contract for the next 1 year or 4 years or what have you. So that's the dynamic route optimization type contracts. And those contracts are really going to be focused on, making sure that they are using their postal carriers when they actually need them, rather than just sticking strictly to their contract and strictly to their schedule. So how that will affect carriers is definitely something that we'll have to see.
Rachel, as you mentioned, DeJoy is there, and he has an extensive background in logistics and knows the industry very well. Even with that, do you see that there will be any particular headwinds that the USPS faces as they continue to go through these changes in the coming years?
Well, there's definitely been quite a bit of press attention on Louis DeJoy, especially, being appointed during the Trump administration. I think it does seem that there has been, less kind of attention on the Postal Service, especially now that the 2020 election has passed and there's less conversation around voting by mail. That could heat up again, perhaps in the next few months as we head into the 2022 midterms. But I really think that the main headwinds for the USPS would definitely just be around adopting these technologies, communicating those changes, and ensuring that carriers can keep up with all of that.
And looking at kind of like an impact on e-commerce as a whole, I know companies like Amazon will often outsource the last mile component to the USPS. When we're talking about renegotiating contracts, I'm assuming the Postal Service is trying to make a lot more money, so they're not effectively subsidizing other larger e-commerce companies.
Yeah, that's something I haven't focused on for this particular story. But I think definitely looking at how they, interact with Amazon specifically is a big one, especially because Amazon is in-housing more of its own volume. So, the more, if the USPS is going to push on Amazon, well, Amazon can simply in-house even more of that, especially as they start to become a transportation company in its own right.
And Rachel, as we continue to end out this week and go into next week, what stories are you going to be looking at, or what's something that you just finished wrapping up that you also want to kind of get out there as well?
Well, I'm going on vacation on Friday, so I'm keeping all in on not trucking for at least a week. But we do have a great piece on my newsletter coming out from our very own Thomas Wasson. So please look out for that. And when I come back from vacation, I'm looking to focus in on, checking in again on this freight downturn, the bloodbath, the great purge, if you will. And I will be checking in on that, seeing how carriers are doing, and, just taking more big picture looks at, why trucking is the way that it is today.
I forgot to mention, Anthony, that I was the guest piece for Modes this week or coming up. So super excited to see it. Rachel, any closing thoughts here, especially with mail, USPS, especially for the viewers who aren't as familiar with parcel? Any final thoughts for the folks here as we're approaching the weekend?
I would say final thoughts. Keep in mind that it is just really interesting to see the Postal Service, how it functions, because most other shippers have really changed to, okay, we're going with brokers, we're going with a few big carriers who can do our contracted freight. But it's just really fascinating that the USPS has stuck for so long to having long haul contractors that some of the private contractors are not necessarily unionized, but all of their long haul truckers are unionized. So it's just a really interesting sort of almost like historic artifact of how a trucking company or how a shipper used to function. So it's definitely interesting just looking at the Postal Service and how it functions and how starkly different it is from other companies today.
Awesome, Rachel. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Insightful as always, and we hope you have a great time on vacation.
Thanks, guys.
And right now, we're going to take our first look at this morning's headlines.